So the name of the Masechta is Masechta's Beitzah, which is, or Masechta's Beya, the Masechta of eggs. Beitzah in Eretz Yisrael, Beya in Chutz La'aretz, in Babylon. This Masechta, at least at its beginning, is a discussion about Muksa. Muksa is the Issa D'Rabbanan, not the Araisa, but rabbinically, about stuff that you can't have. If it was not prepared prior to Shabbos, if it wasn't prepared prior to Shabbos, then it is Asr. Within those rules of Muksa, there is Rabbi Yehuda, who's much more stringent, and then there's Rav Shimon, who's extraordinarily lenient, very mekel. The Gemara uses the lashon that yesh muksa or ein muksa. There is muksa or there is not muksa in talking about their two opinions, and that essentially is where we're going at the beginning of the first parak in Masechtas Beya. Says the Mishnah, Beya or Beitzah shenoitla b'yontif. A beya that is given birth on Yontif, meaning it's the hen lays the egg on Yontif. Beis Shammai says, Toichel, you're allowed to eat the egg. Beis Hillel Loi Toichel. Beis Hillel says, you're not allowed to eat. Tosfos jumps on this lashon right away and says, why don't we say Beis Shammai mutar and Beis Hillel asur? So Tosfos explains in the top Tosfos by the skinny lines, the first skinny line, v'yesh loimed di'i havi tani isurin mutarin. If it had said asur or heter, hayisi aimer, we would have said shema matirin habeitza hainu letaltel. Maybe this that Beis Shammai says you're allowed, it's mutter, the egg, would only be to touch it and to move it. Aval be'achila is surah. But to eat it would be also. So came along our Mishnah and was very clearly defined it that no, Beis Shammai allows you to eat the egg that was born, that was laid on Yontif, and Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to. Beis Shammai. Now, we have another case. We're going to have three machlokes in our Mishnah, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. The next two have nothing in and of itself to do with this argument here, except for one thing and two things. In all of Shas, we always find that Beis Hillel is the mekel, the one who's lenient, and Beis Shammai is the one who's always machmir. Here is an exception to the rule. First of all, with regard to an egg that was first laid on Yontif, it's Beis Shammai that says you're allowed to eat it. Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to. So Beis Hillel is the stringent one here. Now the next case. Beis Shammai Oimrim, Sa'ar b'kizayis, with regard to Chometz on Pesach, if it's leaven, meaning yeast, a leavening agent, you're over on the Yisur of eating Chometz if you eat an olive's worth, b'kizayis, the Chometz b'koisebes. And what do you call it? And Chometz itself, a cake, only if you eat it a date. A date is a larger shear than a kizayis. So Beis Shammai is being mekel with regard to Chometz, that Chometz needs a larger shear, a larger volume of a date in order to be over on the prohibition of eating Chometz on Pesach. Mashe came with regard to a leavening agent, the actual leavening agent is Sar b'kizayis. Beis Hillel says no. Zev v'zev, whether it's a leavening agent like yeast, or whether it's the Chometz piece of cake, they're both with kizayis. Here again, Beis Hillel is being the more stringent, the more chamor. He's saying that even regular Chometz, which is not an agent, a leavening agent, has the same minimum shear of an olive in order to be over on the prohibition of Chometz. And now the third case. Hashoichet chaya b'oif b'yontif. If one slaughters a wild animal or a bird on yontif, of which there is an halacha of kisui adam, that the blood that comes out when you slaughter needs to be covered over. This is an halacha in HaTorah that is only by chayos, wild animals. Behemos, domesticated animals, there is no mitzvah of kisui adam, of covering up the blood. So Ashoichet chaya v'oif b'yontif. If one slaughtered a chaya or an oif on yontif, Beishamai Imrim, Beishamai says, Yachva b'katka b'yichas. Beishamai says, you can take a spade, dig up some dirt, and cover the blood with earth. Why? Because kisui adam is a mitzvah d'oraisa, it's a law d'oraisa. Cover it up. Beitzah says, Lo yishchai, you shouldn't slaughter at all. You shouldn't slaughter a chaya on yontif. Elam came only only if you had dirt prepared from the day before, from Erev Yontif, to cover it up. Umaidim and Hillel is Maida. She'im shochat, that if you slaughtered sheyichbar, if you made the mistake and you did so, you should take a spade and cover up the blood with earth. If you slaughtered, then bidi eved, in the de facto, you must cover it up because there's a mitzvah in the Torah of kisei adam. Sha'afa kira muchenu, because the ashes of a stove are considered prepared. What this means, so the Gemara, Rashi says, the Gemara boy, my comma, what are you talking about? Everybody give me 1 minute. I just have to check in on the baby because I'm watching it right now. Hang on 1 second. All right. Well, good. So, Zok the Gemara, says the Gemara. The first case, a beya shenoimid b'yontif, an egg that was laid on yontif, which Beis Shammai said you're allowed to eat, Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to eat. Now we're going to get into the intricacies of muksa. B'mayaskinon, if we're talking about betana goylus by a hen, or medes la'achila, that the hen itself is designated for eating. That means it's oimid l'shchita la'achila b'yontif. It's standing to be slaughtered, to eat on yontif. Okay. Then the Abizai says the Gemara, my tamai de Beis Hillel. Why? Then what's the time of Beis Hillel that he asers eating or even handling the egg? Eichel diaprahu. What are you talking about? The food, the egg is separated from the food and is not muksa. In other words, the beya, the egg, is part of the hen. And since the hen itself is not muksa, because the hen is being raised to be slaughtered, to be eaten on yontif, so therefore what comes out of the egg, it comes out of the bird, is also set up for yontif. Ella, so Elamai, Jeff, we're holding on the third line of the Gemara. Ella, B'tanagolais, we're still on 2A1. To 2A1, we're going into the right-hand column. Ella, B'tanagolais, or Imedes Legadol Beitzah. We're talking about a hen that is raised not to be slaughtered, but to lay eggs. This guy is in the egg business. In that case, my tamayu de Beis Shammai. What's the time of Beis Shammai that says an egg that's laid on the holiday itself? Beis Shammai says you're allowed to eat, even though it's noiled, it's given birth. Frankly, Gemara muksa. How does Beis Shammai say that it's muksa? Because the egg was not laid before the yontif; it was laid on the yontif, and therefore it was never prepared before yontif. Remember, what is muksa? Muksa is rabbinical, that things that are not prepared before Shabbos or Yontif become muksa on Shabbos or Yontif. You need to prepare stuff that you need for Shabbos, before Yontif. So the egg, which has only been laid today, if the bird was set aside to be slaughtered and eaten on Yontif, well, then the egg is part of the mother. The egg should be allowed. How does Beitzah say you're not allowed to eat it? Elamai, we're talking about a hen that's not to be slaughtered, but is being cultivated to lay eggs. The guys in the egg business knew the egg itself was not here yesterday. It only came into the world today. It only came in the world today. It's muksa. It wasn't prepared from yesterday. So how does Beis Shammai say it's good? So, and for the Gemara, my kasha, what's bothering you? The Beis Shammai, idilma Beis Shammai, less le muksa. Maybe Beis Shammai does not hold of the whole concept of muksa. Now, what does that mean? Everybody holds as a concept of muksa, but there's a great machlokes throughout Shas between Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Shimon takes a very narrow view of muksa. He says there's only very few cases where you have muksa. Rabbi Yehuda takes a very expansive view of muksa. So Rashi, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines in the skinny lines of Rashi. Says like this: Lesle muksa de dilmo ke Rav Shimon sviralu. Maybe it's like Rav Shimon that he holds. The Hama b'perek kiren Shabbos mutar hashemen shebineh, that the oil that you put into a lamp to light is mutar. Okay, and Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda holds it's also. Rav Shimon holds it's mutar, right? So when we say maybe Beis Shammai holds, does not hold from the concept of muksa. What he means is that maybe he holds like Rav Shimon, and he takes a very narrow view of muksa, right? So therefore, in this case, he says, since the hen is set aside to lay eggs, we know she's going to lay eggs. Therefore, it's not a problem when even if the egg first appears on Yom Tov. So says the Gemara, we're now on 2A2. Says the Gemara, Kasal Kedata Chafilu, we have to assume Kasal Kedata Chafilu Man Deshari B'Muksa, that even according to the one who says it's okay with Muksa, I take a very narrow view of Muksa, B'Noilid Asor. Noilid is something else entirely. Something given birth today, something that only first comes into the world today, can in no way be considered as if prepared from the day before, from Erev Yontif, or to be prepared from Erev Shabbos. Since the egg came out of the hen today, right? It wasn't there yesterday. If it wasn't there yesterday, even if I hold that muksa, the whole idea of muksa is a very narrow idea, and that most things are not muksa. Nonetheless, noilid, giving birth, that's what everybody holds it's also. So says the Gemara, if that's the case, my Tama to my Beis Shammai, what's the Tama Beis Shammai that he starts off in our Mishnah? Beitzah shenoid lo b'yontiv, an egg that is laid on yontiv. Beis Shammai yoimrim toichel, that you're allowed to eat. So how do we explain Beis Shammai? So now, Amar Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman, lo'ilam, we're talking about betana goyim ha'omer, this is the gadol beitzim. We're talking about a hen that's not being raised to be slaughtered as food, but is raised to lay eggs. Udi Islay Muksa, and in fact, we're holding the Islay Muksa, and that we hold like the stringent opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who takes a very expansive view of muksa, and Islay, and Islay, and the Islay muksa, Islay noilet, and that there is a din of muksa, and there is, of course, the Isser of noilet, that if something was not prepared from yesterday, and it first comes into the world today, and since it first came in the world today, it's impossible to prepare it yesterday. It's also Udelesle muksa, while the one who holds not for muksa, in other words, he holds like Rav Shimon and takes a very narrow view, of muksa. Less late Nyland. He doesn't even hold from Nyland. In other words, only if I take an expansive view of muksa do I say I then take into this view about Nyland, things giving birth today, that they weren't prepared from yesterday, so they're muksa. But if you take only a narrow version of muksa, like Rav Shimon, then I'm not going to say this is Nyland, because the hen was here, it's here to lay eggs. I have an assumption that it will lay eggs. So therefore, I don't have a problem with this egg. Therefore, it comes out. Beis Shammai Kirev Shimon. Beis Shammai is going like the lenient appearance of the lenient opinion of Rav Shimon. Beis Hillel Kirev Yehuda. And Rav Yehuda and Beis Hillel is going like the difficult position, the more stringent position of Rav Yehuda. This, of course, is extraordinarily strange, because everywhere else, Beis Hillel is always the lenient one, and Beis Shammai is always the more stringent one. But over here, it's different. So the Gemara says, is it possible that Rav Nachman actually just said this, that Beis Hillel is the stringent one, and goes according to Rav Yehuda and takes an expansive view of chametz and of muksa, and therefore there's such a thing as noiland, as opposed to, and Beis Shammai is the lenient one. V'atanan we learned, Beis Shammai Oimrim, Rav Shammai says, on Shabbos, if one's eating at his table and at the end of the meal, there's a bunch of shells on the table, okay, which are not edible anymore for human consumption. They're good for animal consumption, but they're not good for human consumption. Well, if they're not good for human consumption, the leftover shells are not good for human consumption, I've got a muksa issue. And what does it say? Beis Shammai says, Magbi and Me'ala Shulchan Atzamais with Kalipin. One lifts off from the table, okay? One lifts off from the table, we pick up the, Beis Shammai says, we pick up, Beis Shammai says, we go ahead, we pick up the bones and the shells from the table on Shabbos. Beis Hillel Misalik is a tavla kula minara. You have to pick up the entire table and shake it off. You're not allowed to touch it with your hands. So right here, according to the Tanakama of this Baraisa, Beis Shammai once again is lenient, and Beis Hillel is stringent. Beis Shammai says, since the shells and the bones are still useful to feed to animals, they're not muksa, you can touch them with your hands and clean them up. Beis Hillel says, no, you prepared all this eating for human consumption. And therefore, now that this is no longer human consumption, because humans don't eat the shells, you can't touch it directly. You have to shake it off by lifting the table and shaking directly off onto the floor. The Omar Rav Nachman becomes our Rav Nachman and says, no, Anu ein lanu ele Beis Shammai kirev Yehuda uBeis Hillel kirev Shimon. No, we have it down that Beis Shammai is the stringent one, that he goes like Rabbi Yehuda and he takes an expansive view of muksa, And Beis Hillel is like Reb Shimon, and he only takes a narrow view of muksa. So in other words, it's Beis Shammai that says that even though it's good for animal food, since it's not good for human consumption, it, is no good, and you got to lift up the whole table. And it's Beis Hillel that's lenient and says you can even move it with your hands because it's still useful for animal food. So what do you see? That Rav Nachman is clearly saying with regard to Shabbos that Beis Hillel holds like Rav Shimon, a narrow version of muksa. So how could you say by Yontif it's the opposite, that Beis Shammai is the lenient one and Beis Hillel is the stringent one, and Beis Hillel holds like Rav Yehuda and therefore holds from the idea of Noilid, something that comes into the world today, that gives birth today, wasn't prepared from yesterday and is muksa and it's asur. It's a steer between Shabbos and Yontif according to Rav Nachman. Give me 1 second. I'm just checking in on the baby because I'm doing baby seats. Give me 1 second. Okay. Very good. Right. Says so back. Okay, says the Gemara, Amalach Rab Nachman. Comes Rab Nachman, and let's say we're 4 lines from the bottom of the Amud Aleph. We're in the last paragraph on 2A2. Amalach Rab Nachman. There is a difference, and this is a remarkable Gemara because normally, what do we say, everybody? Shabbos is more stringent than Yontif, than the holidays. Nonetheless, not here. Amalach Rab Nachman Gabe Shabbos. With regard to Shabbos, the Stam Lon Tanik Reb Shimon. We have a Stam Mishnah. The Mishnah, the Tana rules unanimously, like Reb Shimon, that we take a very narrow view of muksa. It's not because we learned mechachtin as a duloyin, you're allowed to cut up cucumbers before an animal, if they behema, and a carcass, and you're allowed to cut up a carcass in front of dogs so that they would eat it. Now, when did this become a carcass? When did this animal just simply break down and die? Today, Shabbos. It broke down and died. So it wasn't prepared from yesterday to be food for animals. Nonetheless, this Stam Mishnah right over here says you're allowed to go ahead and cut up the nevela, but what he called the nevela, the animal who simply died without slaughtering. You're allowed to go ahead and feed it to the dogs. And we established Beis Hillel Reb Shimon, and we established that the Stam Mishnah, the anonymous Mishnah, is like Beis Hillel, going according to the idea of Reb Shimon with a very narrow version of chametz. Aval Bad, and now we're on Amid Beis, 2B1, Gabi Yomtav, the Stam Lon Tana Rabbi Yehuda. But with regard to Yomtav, where the Tana ruled anonymously, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana over there, as we're about to see, we have a Mishnah where when it came to Yomtav, that they ruled, they went on the stringent version, and went according to Rabbi Yehuda's expansive view of muksa. It's not because we learned ein mevaktin eitzim in akairos. We do not split wood from beams on Yontif for firewood, even though they're prepared. It was wood that was piled up. It was there for building purposes. Right? It was there for building purposes, but it wasn't there for being used for firewood. Whereas Rashi on top says, Beyontif, the Tanu Ema Biktin and Beyontif. We do not go ahead and chop up wood for Yontif, which you're allowed to do because you're allowed to cook on Yontif. Nonetheless, you don't do this. Loy min hakairis hasiduri zu al gabe zu bekarka. But medes libinian, not with a pile of lumber piled up one on top of each other, which is set aside for building a house. You didn't have it in mind to use as firewood for Yontif. You had in mind to use it for building after Yontif. Can't use it. Nor from a beam which broke on Yontif, even though it broke on Yontif, and it's no longer usable for binyan, and now it should be available to use as firewood. Nonetheless, because you didn't prepare it before, it's muksa with regard to Yontif. It's like noilid, like giving birth on you, something that came into existence on Yontif you didn't prepare before. What do you see? So that with regard to Yontif, we're going very stringent. We're taking a very expansive view of muksa. And because this muksa law was established anonymously, mukin law Beis Hillel, we established it according to Beis Hillel, Kir Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yehuda. So we now see that the law is fluctuating. By Shabbos, we clearly see the Stam Mishnah is lenient with regard to muksa. Goes according to the Shita of Rab Shimon, and that Beis Hillel is taking on going to Rab Shimon. With regard to Yontif, the Stam Mishnah, the anonymous author, is clearly going stringently, like Rabbi Yehuda, an expansive view of muksa. And we say Beis Hillel is holding like Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara, Mechti, my Stam Elamasnisan, who formulated all of these anonymous mishnahs? Rabbi HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. My Shabbos Stam Rabbi Shimon. So why on Shabbos did he formulate it? The Stam Mishnah, according to the lenient opinion, the Kula Dikkat opinion of Rab Shimon and his narrow version of Muksa. Umayshna be Yontif, and why on the holidays on Yontif, the Stam law, the Rebbe made an anonymous mishnah, formulated it, Ki Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yehuda with the expansive view of Muksa Tasa. And in fact, it's Mala al Ryan. It doesn't really make sense because Shabbos is always more stringent than Yontif. And here, with regard to Muksa, Rebbe clearly reversed it. He said, Shabbos, we're going to go past and we're going to do the halacha like Reb Shimon and the narrow version of Muksa. And for Yontif, we're going with the expansive version of Yehuda, which is just the opposite. Says the Gemara, Amri, Shabbos, the Chamira, but since Shabbos is so restricted, so people will not come to treat it disrespectfully. Stamlon Kirab Shimon the Mako. Rabbi then said, therefore, I don't have to put extra guards. I don't have to put extra gezeros, extra ordinances to hold the Shabbos in place. It's okay if we go with the more narrow version, the lenient version of Muksa, according to Rabbi Shimon. Yontif the Kol the Kal, but Yontif, which is very liberal. And people will come to treat it disrespectfully. In which way is Yontif liberal? Are you allowed to cook on Yontif? Yes, you are. Think about it. Are you allowed to carry more easily than you would on Shabbos if there was no Erev? Absolutely. So in many ways, Yontif has more of a weekday feel to it. So in that case, you might come to be very flippant with the Yontif. So in this case, he formulated the Stam Mishnahs, the anonymous Mishnahs, to go according to Rabbi Yehuda, who's the more stringent. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. How have you, Rav Nachman, established the case of the Mishnah? B'tarnagoyis, with my hand, Medes the Gadol Beitzah, who was raised to lay eggs, umishum muksa. And Rabbi Beis Hillel said in that case, the egg is muksa because it was not in the world today. It was not in the world yesterday. It was only born into the world today, so it's completely not prepared. As opposed to a hen that's set aside to be slaughtered. In that case, it's already considered a foodstuff prepared before, okay? And therefore the egg that would come out of it would also be prepared. So the Gemara, instead of saying that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing about the egg, whether we take an expansive pure muksa or a narrow pure muksa with regard to eating the egg, let's argue with the hen itself. Why are you going to the egg? Let's talk about the hen. A hen that's set aside to lay eggs, Beis Hillel would say, is muksa. The hen itself is muksa. Beis Shammai would say, since theoretically you can still eat the hen, there are other hens are made to be eaten. Therefore, it's not muksa. He would take the narrow view. So why are you going to the eggs? Talk about the chicken. What comes first, the egg or the chicken? The chicken comes first. So, and for the Gemara, to teach us the strength of Beis Shammai's leniency, that not only the chicken itself is allowed to be eaten, even though, of course, the chicken is set aside only to lay eggs, but since intrinsically the chicken is here, the hen is here. It's just its classification is questionable, but the hen is here. And the Beis Shammai says, okay, you're allowed to eat it. The egg, however, was not here. The egg was not here. Maybe Beis Shammai would say in such a case where it's not here, I would say you're not allowed to have anything to do with it. Kamash Malon, the Beis Shammai is so lenient that not only the hen, even though it's only prepared to lay eggs and not to be eaten, since the hen is be'en means it's here. So it's here, Beis Shammai said it's good enough to think. But even the egg that's not here, since a hen is given to lay eggs, that's good enough. And that's good enough, and they think. Okay? Just hang on 1 second. The baby's beeping. Let me just take a look and see what the story is. Be right back. Now, says the Gemara, I'm back again. We're on the last paragraph on 2b1. But let them argue about the hen. You wanted to say they're arguing about the egg to teach us how lenient Beis Shammai is. That is not only the hen that's actually here, but even the egg that's not here is allowed to be eaten. Says the Gemara, I can look at this the other way. Let's say they are arguing in the hen. To teach us the strength of the stringency of Beis Hillel. That even in the case of muksa, he's expansive unbelievably. That what? Even though the chicken is here, the hen is here, and even though hens intrinsically are for eating, they still says, if my classification is wrong, my classification is this hen is not set aside to eating, it's set aside to lay eggs, the hen is no good. You can't eat the hen on Yom Tov. If you ran out of hens, your wife can't slaughter the hen and eat and cook up chicken. Not happening because you classified it wrong. That's the strength of Beis Hillel, that even though it's here, it's a chicken, bada bing, bada classification matters. Says the Gemara, and if you're going to say b'chitema, the reason why we go the other way, to show the leniency, we talk about the egg in our Mishnah, to show the leniency of Beis Shammai, that even the egg which is not here is mutter, because we have a rule, kayach dehetera adif, the rule of permissible rulings is greater. This we always say, a rabbi that it can find the halachas to allow you to do things is a much greater rabbi, is a much greater Talmud Chacham than a rabbi that keeps telling you, no, 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 you can't, you can't, you can't. It's easy to say you can't. It's not so easy to say, yes, it's okay, you're allowed to. Okay? And so, and therefore, niflik b'tavayu, and let our Mishnah simply say they're arguing in both cases to show the strength of the stringency of Beis Hillel, that even though the hen is here, it has the wrong classification, and to show the leniency of Beis Shammai, that even though the egg was not here to begin with, since it's standing to be here, because that's what hens do, they lay eggs, right? It's good enough, you can have it. Argue both. The Mishnah should have said as follows. In the case of a hen that's being raised to produce eggs, who Beitzah regarding herself and the eggs which she lays on Yom Tov itself, you can eat both. You're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat the egg because it wasn't even here, it was never prepared. And you can't eat the chicken because it has the wrong classification. So very good. Since the Mishnah, we're on 2b2. Now we're on 2b2. Okay, let me just give me a second. 2b2. Okay? And the Gemara says like this, and since the Mishnah does not present both disputes, Rab Nachman's interpretation is seriously compromised. If you look at the article, that's what they write on the top in the explanation in the Gemara part. Because according to Rab Nachman, there's a two-sided argument over here, and the fact that the Mishnah only talks about one side, the egg, and not the hen, his explanation of the Mishnah is kind of forced, therefore. So now we have another explanation of the Mishnah. Ela Marabo, this is the case of the Mishnah. In fact, we're talking about an egg that's being raised to be slaughtered for Yom Tov, and therefore it's not muksa. For Yom Tov, and what are we talking about for Yom Tov? And we're talking about an egg that was laid on Yom Tov that fell after Shabbos. It fell on a Sunday. And Beis Hillel prohibits the consumption of the egg because of the principle of preparation. You didn't prepare it. Shabbos, everything was certainly muksa. It wasn't there. It wasn't prepared. Therefore, it's not prepared, said Beis Hillel. It says Beis Hillel, I'm sorry, not prepared, since of course it was not in the world. So how could it have been prepared before Yom Tov? In other words, the stuff that you need on Yom Tov, you need to prepare before Yom Tov. You didn't prepare it, no good. The Ksavar Rabba and Rabba holds, Kol Beitzah, the Misyalda, Adin and Meyesmo Garmelo, that any egg laid today was already fully formed inside the mother, the hen, from yesterday. Okay? So therefore, an egg that was laid on Yom Tov, which fell on Sunday, matured completely on Shabbos. Since, according to Rabbah, all Yom Tov or Shabbos foods must be designated and prepared the day before on an ordinary weekly day. Such an egg cannot be eaten on Yom Tov, even though its preparation was completely natural and didn't involve any prohibited isser. It doesn't let labor. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is, when did it fully mature? Yesterday. So when did it come into existence? Yesterday. On Shabbos. Oops, got a problem. Can't do that. That's no good. Says the Gemara, the Rabba Latamei, and Rabba gives it to his own reason. The Omer Rabba, Ma'adik Siv, what is written? V'hoya b'yoyim hashishi v'chni v'sheyaviu. And it will be on the sixth day that you shall prepare the mon which they bring. This is why we do why we have two challahs. Because they got a double portion of mon on Friday. So we do that on the Shabbos because on Shabbos you weren't allowed to, right? I'm sorry. On Shabbos you weren't allowed to go out and gather. So, okay, Lechem Mishnah. Thank you. My brain's not working here. Lechem Mishnah. So, that teaches us that on the weekdays you need to prepare for Shabbos, which is another way of saying the ant prepares in the summertime, the squirrel prepares in the summertime for the wintertime. A Jew prepares on the weekdays for the Shabbos, and a Jew prepares his life, his whole life, for the world to come. That's how it is. And a weekday prepares also for Yontif. But the ain Yontif meichen l'Shabbos. But Yontif cannot prepare for Shabbos. The ain Shabbos mechino l'Yontif. And your Shabbos cannot prepare for Yontif. Therefore, Basil asks an egg laid on Yontif, since it's preparation because it came into being. It was prepared in the mother's stomach, as it were, in the hen's stomach the day before on Shabbos. On this, says the Gemara, Amalei Abaya, is that effect, Elameyato, Yontif Ba'alma Ishtrei, but an egg laid on a regular Yontif, which did not fall out on a Sunday, and a Yontif that falls out on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Therefore, according to you, according to Beis Hillel, it should be permitted, because when the egg was laid on Yontif, but it became fully formed when the day before, in the mother, the day before was a weekday. So it's in essence been prepared on a weekday. So you should hold it's perfectly good. So what's going on? Says you're right. Says the truth is you're right. Nonetheless, Gizera, the Rabbana made a rabbinical decree, Mishum Yontif after Shabbos, because the Yontif that comes out on the Shabbos on a Sunday. Because if we're lenient on a regular Yontif, we say, oh, the egg was laid today, and it must have come into existence yesterday, it's good to go. We're going to end up making the mistake when the holiday actually falls out on Sunday, which means the preparation took place on Shabbos, and that's no good. Shabbos the Alma Tishri, but an egg laid on a regular Shabbos, which means that it was developed the day before on Friday, should be allowed. Says the Gemara, you're right. The truth is it should be allowed. But the problem is we made a rabbinical decree on account of the case of the Shabbos that follows the Yontif. Since an egg laid on such a Shabbos came into being the day before on Yontif, and you can't prepare for Yontif to Shabbos without an Erev Tafshilin, which we'll talk about it another time. Umi Gazinon, but are you really telling me that we made such degrees extending the provision to an egg laid on any Shabbos and Yontif because of when Yontif falls right after Shabbos or Shabbos falls right after Yontif? But how do we learn in the Beitzah? If somebody slaughtered a hen, even when Yontif falls out on a Sunday, but basic Gemuras, and inside the hen he finds fully developed eggs. He's allowed to eat it on Yontif. The aim is, if it's true that they made a gezerah regarding Rabba's rule of preparation, right, Rabbi? So because of achana, preparation, then you should make it, you should asser it, you should prohibit it rabbinically on account of those eggs that are laid on their proper day. Okay? In other words, the Shabbos of the Yontif. But you see that we do not. We allow you, if you slaughter the hen and you find the eggs, we allow you to eat them. So now we're on 2b3. Says the Gemara, just give me 1 second. Amalei, Beitzim Gemurais b'mei iman milsad l'shchichu. Fully developed eggs in their mother's insides, inwards, is an rare occurrence. And we have a rule that the Rabbanan do not issue decrees in a very rare occurrence. Since slaughtering an animal and finding fully developed eggs is so rare, there we just say, just like you're allowed to eat the animal because you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, so whatever you find inside is like part of the animal. In the other cases, that's a different ballgame, where the animal laid the egg already, and now we can look back and say, when was it formulated? When was it prepared? That's a different story. Very good. We're stopping here.